Really cool to see her here too. My name is Maggie. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a master's student at the School for Environment and Sustainability in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm about to graduate, studying environmental psychology, interested in adaptation and resilience and intersection with justice and community engagement. And this coming summer, I'll have a fellowship with the Redirect organization, which is a nonprofit that was started by professors here at the university who are environmental psychologists. And I will be working with Ann Arbor's Sustainability Office to see how those environmental psychology concepts can help their adaptation and resilience programming be more community engaged and successful. And very excited to be here today. I luckily got out of class early, so was able to join. And let's see, I'm not sure since I was late who hasn't gone. I could popcorn to Deb if you haven't gone yet.
I haven't. Thanks, Maggie. And I'm sorry my video's off. My internet's a little questionable today, so hopefully I'm coming through on audio. I'm Deb Rudnick. I'm an environmental scientist with a nonprofit organization, EcoAdapt. I do project management and facilitation with them, and this is my first meeting, and I'm super excited to be here. Thanks so much. And I will pass it to Sean.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean Bass. I'm a program manager and scientist with the Climate Adaptation the NOAA Climate Adaptation Partnerships Program in the Climate Program Office at NOAA in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is the ancestral lands of the Piscataway and Nacotchtank. What other prompts were there for this? I was also late. Anything?
You're fine, Sean. You've given us the goods.
Excellent. I'll popcorn over to you, and this is a complete guess as to whether gone. I don't know, Ingrid.
Hello, everyone. I am Ingrid Dobringer. I have COVID today, so I'm just mostly listening. I'm interested in building youth resiliency, well-being, and capacity through education about climate adaptation. And I will popcorn to Kendra.
Hi everyone, I'm Kendra Norella. I'm with the Institute for Sustainable Communities as a senior program officer. We work to support community-based organizations run by people of color who do climate justice activities in their local communities. And I'm on the land of Powhatan in Richmond, Virginia, and I use she, her pronouns. And I will pass it to Jerry.
Hi everyone, it's Jerry Zinniga, pronouns he, him. This is my first meeting, and I was trying to do forensics on how I got here, and as soon as Nicole started speaking, I was like, yes, okay, that makes sense. So Nicole, I know you from way back in San Jose. I'm in Fresno, California now. And when I was with Rebuilding Together. So I'm with Habitat for Humanity International, and I support housing preservation strategy. And I'm excited to be here. I've been trying to come up to speed on what you guys are working on, and just I'm in the listening mode, but really excited to be here. I'm also on a hot spot right now, so which is why my video is not on. I'm my wife's trying to fix it right now, so I might pop on in a little bit if we can get that going. But I'm happy to be here.
Jerry, it's so good to see you. This is exciting. But as far as getting up to speed, this is only our second meeting, and we'll be going throughout the year. So this is definitely an evolution that Jackie will talk us through as well.
I think Ariel hasn't introduced herself, maybe, or himself. So Ariel.
I did.
Oh, you did. Sorry.
Yes.
What about
Lucy? Okay.
What about Lucy?
Thanks. Sorry to be a few minutes late. Hi, everyone. I'm Lucy Perkins. I use she, her pronouns. My work takes place on Indakina, which is the ancestral homelands of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present, also known as New Hampshire. And I'm a NOAA Coastal Management Fellow with the Department of Environmental Services, and have been excited to listen in and participate in this group because part of our work in a recent project has really been focused on neighborhood level resilience and having conversations about being in place and moving away from places that we care about, and really finding that the work is not focused on sort of technical hard infrastructure, which is where a lot of our backgrounds come from, but having to facilitate conversations about home and places we love. So to see that this was a focus of this group is just a really timely opportunity to engage in conversation and really be of service with the people we're working with. So grateful to be here today.
And then I think it's Imogen hasn't gone.
It is, yeah, thank you. Imogen Ainsworth. I use she, her pronouns, and this is actually, I'm a brand new ASAP member, so this is my first meeting of any kind. And I am a sustainability consultant with Brendel Group. It's based in Fort Collins, but I'm actually based in Salida, Colorado, which is the ancestral home of the Diné Bikea and Ute people. And I work mostly with local governments and some private sector on sustainability and climate resilience and energy planning, that kind of thing.
And Palevi, I think, still needs to introduce too.
Thanks, Jacqueline. So my name is Palevi Mande, and I use she, her pronouns. I am joining you all from Boston, Massachusetts, the ancestral lands of the Massachusetts and Nipmuc people. And I think I might have attended the first meeting. I'm not totally sure. I am new to ASAP, and I've tried to go to a few different groups. So my apologies if I am not totally able to recall what happened in the first meeting if I was there, but I'm really happy to be here. And my background is in urban design, environmental planning, and I work in the climate space. I have been working in the climate space for the last decade. Plus I consult, and I also teach at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Really happy to be here.
Thank you so much. Again, I'm Jackie Lambiers. I teach at TCU, Texas Christian University in Fort Worth, Texas. It is a land of the Wichita people and affiliated tribes, and I use she, her pronouns. And the partners with me for this group that we're just getting started, so thanks for coming to our second meeting and giving us a second chance if you came the first time, is Nicole Kane and David Savarese and Sylvia Chang, who couldn't be with us today. But we're all kind of co-directing and partnering to provide at least a little bit of leadership for this group, and we would love for all of you to get involved. A couple of things. One is we would like for our next meeting to pair with this meeting. This meeting, we're going to talk about listening and engagement a little bit. We would love to have some case studies of listening and engagement from some of you, if you feel open to sharing that with us in our April meeting. And if you'd like to throw something in the chat or drop one of us an email or reach out to us another way, we would love that to hear from you and to have some of those case studies that might bring out some actual engagement strategies and things that you've tried to reach the widest part of the community that you can reach. I thought we could start today by breaking up into getting into a couple of breakout rooms, and then we'll come back. But I thought we could start today by trying to build an inventory of how your organization listens and what channels does it use for listening. And so you might take a couple of seconds right now to start thinking about those things. I'll place us into several breakout rooms for a few minutes, and then we'll come, you can share in those breakout rooms how you might be listening, and maybe people have ideas in your breakout room that you can add to your list to make that list more robust. And then we can think about those listening channels, and especially related to vulnerable communities, especially how are we listening to vulnerable communities, not just the same or the usual suspects, right? How do we dig deep and get away from listening to the same old, the people who are the loudest, the people with the most power? And so I hope I'm smart enough to put us in breakout rooms, but we're going to do that, and then we'll come back and I have a little bit of discussion, and then I'll do a real quick little Pecha Kucha where I'm talking a little bit about some of the listening research that I've been involved with here in Fort Worth, Texas, especially with Black stakeholders. And so breakout rooms, I think I'm going to just do like 4 or 5 breakout rooms. So there'll be a couple people in each one, and we'll come back in a few minutes, and I'll see you then. So again, we're going to be thinking about our own listening channels and trying to build a really robust list of all the ways we are listening, or maybe the ways we should be listening through those channels. So we'll see you back in a few minutes. How'd you do? I would love to hear a little bit about some of the conversation in your breakout room, in terms of just maybe some of the more general ways that a lot of people are listening, and maybe some unique ways that you learned about today.
I'm taking notes, which is why I'm looking to the site often. But our group had a really interesting conversation about baking in versus sprinkling on. I don't know if someone else in the group wanted to share.
This is Jerry. It's a term that I heard. I was part of the ASA Rise Fellows, and it's centered on equity and aging. And one of the things that stood with me in the fellowship was that sort of approach of baking in versus sprinkling on top. And it was something that essentially is, if it's baked in and it's then it's part of every bite, meaning everything that you do has that in it, versus sprinkling on top, which is essentially it's done as an afterthought, and essentially it doesn't permeate all the way through. So I connected with that. That was something I heard, and I just was like, yes, I get it. And so that's where that came from. Feel free to use it.
Wow, I love that. That's incredibly great. Thank you for sharing that. What else did you all talk about?
In our group, everyone was kind of just eager to learn from everyone else, I think, but we did talk a little bit about like the importance of relationships in listening, and that it takes time. I think Palevi had some good points around that.
Thanks, Imogen. Just to complete that thought, since we got cut off midway, I was essentially recognizing that, it's hard for people who are, mostly involved on, as consultants on projects that have a defined kind of, start and end time. And, those projects sometimes don't have the kind of time that it takes to build relationships. So I was saying that, at least in my experience, it's been really critical to kind of reach the community through a grassroots group, a community-based group that already has the relationships that so they don't have to spend time building trust, because people already kind of know what they're about. And if they are the ones who are trying to get involvement and sort of create an understanding of how a given project would impact them or create opportunities, I think that's one good practice, I guess. And then the second piece that I was agreeing with Imogen in saying that it's great if we can compensate community people who are giving their time to either share their feedback or work with the consultant to sort of ground them in existing conditions or whatnot, they should be compensated for their time, because it's only fair to, you can't expect people to give you knowledge and wisdom and time without anything in return. So those are the two things that I figured we could definitely keep in mind.
Those are wonderful. My university is working with several Native American groups, and one of the last sessions that we had, they talked about how they feel like they've been, literally researched to death, and not maybe listened to very much. So Sean.
There was also a lot of talk in my group about relationships and taking advantage of, when there's already a relationship that exists elsewhere, using contractors for that. So I'll just say like +1 to that one, and or if you can, having like coffee conversations with people and just focusing in on what people are experiencing. But I think another thing that we touched on that resonated was giving platforms for people to show what their own experiences are directly or speak in their own words directly. So this was both in photo voice methodologies, which I have not heard about since grad school. So I was excited to hear about that. Where you give a camera to someone and see what they take of their world around them. And oral histories has been popping up in my world lately, where you can record people and let them hear about or hear from them about their own experiences in their own words about what's going on.
Right. I think that's so important. I'm mostly a qualitative researcher, and I love using participants' voices. And I'm always very careful about talking about that we're creating meaning with our participants. It's not us, and making sure we acknowledge that. And I think to Palevi's point about compensating the people that we're working with, that sort of ties together, giving them that credit, listening to them in their own voice, paying them for their time would be important. Other insights or quick conversations that you had in those breakout rooms?
Yeah, our group, all of us talked about very local community experiences. And I'll pick up on Palevi's point too. One of the things I mentioned is that I work with a program right now that has grant funding, so that we can offer stipends to our workshop participants. And I think it's really important to be able to do. I wish more people would actually take us up on it, but we do offer it. And then I wanted to highlight something Kendra said, and she can jump in if I've misrepresented it. But one of the things she was talking about is how there's a whole world of climate change terminology that we use that communities don't necessarily speak. What they speak is the problems that are local to their community, and just being really cognizant of that and spending more time with their language, and then translating it back into climate speak if that's something we need to do for our funders or partnering organizations. So I thought that was a really good point.
Love that. I love the idea of grants. That's terrific, Deb. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else want to talk about what they talked about in their breakout room?
This isn't, oh, sorry.
No, Katie, I was going to say Katie.
Oh, this isn't from our breakout room, but I just wanted to build on what was just shared. I really love that idea of like minding the gap between like our terminologies and the language that communities use. And I think also like on the notion of this collaboration, I think it's valuable to sit down with communities and say, okay, so what I'm hearing you say would equate to this terminology for us. And then like sort of like hash out those definitions together, because a community member might say, well, okay, but your official terminology is missing this thing. And so just to be clear, like when we're translating, that those things that community members are saying aren't lost in translation when we codify them back into our terminology.
Yeah, I love that extra point, Katie. It's almost like using a community-based language. Yeah, that's terrific. Other insights?
So for me, one of the takeaways from the discussion in our group was trying, how do we get around the challenge of getting people into a room in the current situation, and the challenge of getting feedback from the same people when you have compiled the data later on. And I had some of that difficulty in my own doctoral research, because people have so much going on in their lives that they really don't have time for this. But then, that itself was a learning, because, my research was on how people make trade-offs. And here in my interviews with those people, they had to make trade-offs again to spare time for me and share their insights. So it had to be clear what's in it for them. What do they get out of that process?
That's right. And sort of in the listening research, we know that people want to know what happened after you listened. Like, what's that accountability piece? And so I think that's important too, like just continuing the conversation and also letting them know what's in it for them. But I think for them to understand that, they have to know what you did with what you listened to and how you may have changed things. And that's really interesting, Val. I love that too.
Sorry, I just wanted to chime in quickly on that aspect that you talked about, Val, in terms of getting people in the room. And I know it's takes more time and effort on one's part, but if it's difficult for you to have a meeting and expect people to come to it, maybe the other way to go about doing it is, go to the people in terms of where they are at. So, going to say a church community or, a place where people are congregating for their own sort of reasons. So it's not you're expecting people to drop everything in their lives and come to talk to you or ask for your opinion. And the other thing I was going to say, because that is something I have definitely learned by doing, is, even though we might have some, this is again comes back to the language issue, we might have some specific mandates or objectives of our own research, but I think it's always better to kind of start the conversation with, what really matters to the community, and then maybe tie it in with, how what you're trying to do kind of connects with that. Because if we go in the other direction, a lot of people just sort of glaze over and they're like, so, why are you telling us all this? Because this has nothing to do with what I have to deal with every day. So, basically meeting people where they're at, and then having that as a way to kind of have the conversation regarding, quality of life or what have you.
Thank you, Palevi. David, and then Deb.
I work for private sector, and we also work with academics largely to insert as much as we can the qualitative and quantitative understanding of community, right? We also work with neighborhood partnerships to achieve that. It's still immensely difficult to keep that understanding across the entire life cycle delivery of the process, from concept to strategy to design to delivery to commissioning and to confirmation, right? I think one of the answers I'd like to chase this year is, if there is truly an apparatus in the ivory tower to deploy an army of grad students to understand a community so that we come to a project with an ethnography in hand, that's a mechanism I'm keen to plug into.
Yeah, that'd be terrific. Deb, I think you might have had your hand up, but maybe not. I don't know.
I did. I was just thinking about what Palevi was saying, and I really appreciate that comment about like meeting people where they're at. I will say, just having what I'm working on right now is working with communities and trying to get them in a room, which is challenging for all the reasons that you all have discussed. But I will also say that if you can get folks in a room across areas of expertise, across stakeholders, there is something really powerful about making those connections. And unfortunately, I think you have to get people in a room who may not otherwise get in a room together, or just may not naturally have had an opportunity for these more in-depth conversations. So there is really there's a synergy that happens, even like when we work with jurisdictions and some of these departments never talk to each other. It is amazing what they come up with when they actually have time to get in a room together. So I just want to put a plug in for that.
Yeah.
When we can break down silos to facilitate room for conversation, it can be a really productive thing.
Yeah, I think that's terrific. You know, what I always encourage people to do is to try to go into other people's rooms, right? Like go to their community meetings and go when you don't need anything, just to listen and to understand them and to build those relationships. And then you can maybe invite them to your room, but it's always good to maybe go and just hang out a little bit. Bala, we'll do one more comment before we kind of do a real quick Pechakucha. Go ahead, Bala.
Yeah, quick comment on the discussion so far. So I'm totally in favor of going and meeting people where they are, and that's how I was doing the interviews before the pandemic set in. And there's great value in meeting people where they are, because you are also conscious of the surroundings. There's a context in which you relate to people, the context in which you're listening. And then when the pandemic started, I had to pivot to interviews on Zoom and phone calls. And I thought, oh, this is such a big setback. And then it turned out that I learned new things on these phone calls that I wouldn't have if I had restricted myself to people I could visit in person, because I ended up talking to people who had zero mobility and who would have declined an in-person meeting. And when I asked them, how is the pandemic affecting you? The reaction was, it changes nothing for me because I was anyway isolated. And I live way down the bayou where nobody comes and meets me. I have to ask for a special vehicle to go and go for my medical appointment and so on. So, you know, there are, I guess what I'm saying is, when you really open in your listening, then, you know, irrespective of how you do it, you end up learning a lot. Thank you.
I love that the channel change really made a difference. And I think we have to think about how many different kinds of inputs can we find. And that might change the type of information and the kind of people we're able to access. So I love, that's a great example. I'm going to share a really quick slideshow. And we'll talk, you know, Pechakucha is basically, it's supposed to be 20 slides for 20 seconds for each slide. So it's about a 6-minute presentation. This is going to be under 5 and it's not that many slides, but it's just a way to condense a lot of material so that we can have more discussion at the end. And I'm going to share with you some research I've been doing over the past 3 years here in the Fort Worth community with Black stakeholders. I'm white, of course. One of my research partners is Black. Another one of my research partners is also white. And so when we approach Black stakeholders to talk to them, and I mean, that's another community that's been researched a lot and maybe not as much as it should have been, but we don't want to be extractors and part of that extraction model. But so one of the promises we made when we were interviewing people was that we would be doing all kinds of public sessions and doing publicly engaged scholarship and sharing it back with them. And so we've kept in contact with these participants, and that's again sort of that accountability piece. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly, and we'll whip through this as quickly as we can, and then we'll have some more quick conversation. One of the things that came out in our first meeting last month was that a lot of people wanted to talk about storytelling. So we will find time this year to talk about storytelling. I love this quote from the sociologist who says, you must tell a more powerful tale, one that's so persuasive it sweeps away the old myths and becomes the preferred story. And to me, this goes with Jerry's idea about something being baked in, that we have to quit being such storytellers and communicators and outward focused, but that we become true listeners, and listening is baked into organizations. And so I'm going to share with you just some ideas about how Black stakeholders perceived listening from the city of Fort Worth, from the official municipal government. During a time after a Black woman was killed here, Tatiana Jefferson, and I definitely want to say her name. The trial took a long time to happen. This happened in the fall of 2019, and that's when we began our research. And that trial was finally held this past December, and the white police officer who killed her in her own home was found guilty of manslaughter. But here's what people told us about how the city listened during that time. The Black stakeholders in Fort Worth that we interviewed said that the public participation in municipal government does not equal listening. And I think a lot of elected officials and committees and organizations feel like if they have the 3-minute comment time, that's okay, that's enough, and it's really not enough. And sometimes that's all people see. So we heard that from a lot of participants. Another finding was that listening to them seemed like publicity and not real dialogue. It was more like public relations. They felt like lack of attention and acknowledgement of their needs and of their pain and of their grievances and attention to past history. The lack of attention to that meant that the listening process was racist to them. They also felt like privileged speakers were more likely to be heard than them themselves. And so they mentioned this one family here in Fort Worth that's very wealthy and seems to run everything and own everything. And I'm sure your communities have people like that too. And they mention that name and invoke that name over and over again. And so our recommendations were that organizations need to do a better job of emphasizing listening. Some of the stuff that you all have already talked about in your small group and in our big group today. And then how do we communicate with more authenticity and empathy? A lot of the younger Black people that we talked to said that they have different ideas than their elders about language and urgency, optimism, and we should listen to young people too, that you can't always go to the Black church, for instance, to get Black stakeholder input, that you need to open your aperture. People were interested in wanting to know, did the city or did the government or whoever they were talking to actually take different action after they listened, or did they already have a decision made? A lot of our participants talked about listening as a human rights issue, which I thought was really powerful to think about it through the framework of human rights. And then they also talked about things that you all talked about in your breakout rooms, those partnerships and relationship building that's already gone on ahead of time, and how important that is. This slide has a lot of words on it. One of the big outcomes of our study was to think about all the things that the participants told us they didn't think worked very well. Those are the activities on the left-hand side of the screen right now. So we're urging communicators and people working for municipal organizations and local organizations to stop doing some of these things on the left and are doing so many of them, and to try to replace them with some of the things on the right-hand side. So instead of having those very stilted and choreographed town hall meetings where there's leaders on a platform and everybody's mostly sitting there listening, they're not, the people on the platform aren't listening very much. Have trained listeners in breakout rooms. Instead of listening to the usual suspects or the most powerful speakers, use more scientific surveying for more representative input. Instead of having celebrations in state of the city or state of the school district or state of whatever organization it is, events for elites, you've got to meet residents in their own neighborhoods and at their own meetings. Instead of relying too much on social media and some toxic forums there, have more face-to-face and boots on the ground. One of our participants told us if they can put boots on the ground to turn off our water, they can put boots on the ground to come and listen to us, which I thought was a very powerful statement. Instead of communicators always pushing out content, and what I would say, just having one damn story after another, using communicators as listeners. Obviously, communication should be two-way, But I think a lot of times communication programming or roles inside of efforts often do too much output and not enough input. And of course, the thing that seems to be the most contentious, especially in municipal government right now, are these 3-minute comments at council meetings or school board meetings where we've got angry people coming in and using up their 3 minutes to be angry or to ask for help. And figuring out that's always going to happen. Sometimes that's a legal requirement, obviously, but how do you have better and more productive, structured, multiple inputs with leaders? One of the other things kind of that came from this study was figuring out how do organizations, local organizations, build listening structures that build trust. And we love the idea of organizations appointing somebody officially or unofficially as the listener in chief. In other words, they're the person where all input comes, all listening, all feedback. They look at patterns and make sure they're kind of the accountability chief as well, to make sure things get solved, to make sure there's the feedback and change that needs to happen. So a lot of times we have a lot of listening nodes, but there's really nobody taking stock of all listening and making sure that things get handled properly. And so we tried to build out what that might look like. One of the, in terms of not ignoring the voices of these participants, here's one of the voices from our study. To build trust, local government has to address safety and quality of life issues that are making our city less livable for certain members of the community than others. And I thought that was a lovely statement, and I wanted to make sure to include here. And of course, listening is hard work. It's super hard. And so but it's worth it. It's meaningful. I love this quote from Gwendolyn Vincent, who talks about if racial equity and justice work is transactional, where we're just going out, crossing this thing off the list that we've done the listening, or if it's about your own self-image or your organization's relevance, the work cannot be done effectively or sustainably. And so you got to build relationships. That's what Palevi was talking about earlier. You got to build relationships first before trust. You have to show up to those community and neighborhood meetings when you don't need anything. Another voice of a participant was this one. Transparency was okay. And this person actually said, it's okay to say we're doing this wrong. Let's talk about how to do it better. Let's take your opinions and try it. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. To be flippant about it and almost act like you're sick of hearing about it, we're sick of living it. I just absolutely love this quote. Kind of one of the last slides here is just when we were taking stock of listening research, there's basically 3 types of listening that scholars have identified. One is sort of this compassionate or empathetic listening, which of course we need, but that listening doesn't necessarily lead to solutions or changes. And so if you're just doing empathetic listening, but you're not taking action as an organization, that's not good for solutions. So you shouldn't just do compassionate listening. The next one is what we called stonewall listening. In other words, you already have categories for what you think you're going to hear, and you're listening for certain things and you're going to put them in the bucket. But if you hear something that's kind of from the outside that you weren't expecting, you kind of discard it. And so it means you're kind of listening for yourself, but you're not listening for the community. And then the last one is no agenda listening. It's when you lay down all power and control. You don't have an agenda. You show up in a meeting and listen to what people have to say without your organization's priorities sort of setting the agenda too much. And so this is, I think, the most important kind of listening, and of course, the hardest one to do. This is the study, and I'll share this. Just want to let you know, this is a study that was published last year. Here's some other sources and resources for you, and we'll share this as part of the follow-up to this meeting. But would love to talk a few minutes that we have remaining about maybe ways you think about your own listening structures. Do you have a listener in chief? Could you have one? Are these ideas at all helpful to the good work that you all are doing?
I'll add in something just really quickly. I love everything. I'm connecting so much to this what you've shared, Jacqueline. And one of the things that in developing out strategy that I found that I'm trying to employ is also taking a qualitative and a quantitative approach to listening. And because there tends to be this things shift into anecdotal very quickly. We use one piece of information to essentially develop out an approach. So trying to apply just a metric to when we're listening, are we listening effectively? Certainly more data helps, and connecting with more people and trying to use that as a starting point. But really just trying to figure out, like, what are the quantitative things that am I hearing from here, and if we are recycling that back out into a strategy or whatever we're trying to do, really just trying to separate that in my head has been a tremendous help. Narratives versus like data. It's just really one of those things that I think is a guiding point for me.
Right, exactly. You need both, right? You need the quantitative and the qualitative. And sometimes people rely too much on one or the other, but it's all important. You've got to synthesize that. And that's what I think a listener in chief can do, can take all that stuff, all those inputs, and look at the patterns and see what goes on there. I think that's terrific. Thanks for talking about that, Jerry. Ariel.
Yeah, I just wanted to share something that really resonated with me kind of at the outset of working on heat resilience here in Southern Nevada, which was the phrase, go into other people's rooms before you invite them to yours. We've been thinking about holding focus groups with all sorts of different communities, types of people, whether that's the business community, emergency responders, or our most heat impacted communities. It took me back a second, especially when thinking of our heat burdened communities. And it made me realize that there's work to be done before I can even put focus groups together. And that involves, going into those communities and just sitting, listening, and doing so very humbly and without that agenda, not bringing a lot of baggage with me or these goals that we're outlining or any of that stuff. And that's something that I think has really shifted my thinking in a much more creative, and it really resonated with me. So I just want to say thank you to the folks who shared that. And I want you to know that's something that I found really impactful that I will put into practice. So thank you.
Hey, that's terrific. I mean, it's hard to just walk in someplace and be a stranger, right? Those are, we have to be vulnerable to do that. We have to be vulnerable to do that. Bala.
Thank you. That was really thought-provoking, and my brain is crowded with thoughts provoked by your presentation, but let me share one. I was thinking it is very rare that you go into a community to listen without any agenda. There is always some intentionality behind your entry. And therefore, I was wondering, can we think about how the type of listening you engage in sort of depends on where you're coming from, why you're there. The intentionality of your listening exercise, and then that might be very helpful. I was a planning practitioner before I became a researcher, and so as a planning practitioner, when you start listening, you already have an agenda. It's almost inevitable that you have an agenda. So I was wondering how one would listen differently depending on why you're there. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you really do have to lay down that power and control, and it's really hard, I think, for people to do that. Katie.
Yeah, I think I just want to emphasize something that, like, part of building trust with communities is actually incorporating what the community says. And that's something that I have seen not happen in climate action plans that I've read. And I've also seen it in my experience. I am a former public school teacher in Oakland. The community-based organizations, parents have been participating in, those 3-minute comments at school board meetings saying, stop closing schools because the school closures disproportionately affect our Black and Brown students. And so the community has been a tidal wave of saying, stop closing schools, and the school board continues to do that. So really an important part of building trust is incorporating the feedback. And the other thing I'm thinking about is being mindful of bias. So if a listener in chief is established, it's really important that that person be aware of not just their privilege, but also their positional bias, because sometimes I think what we hear doesn't get incorporated because what we hear is maybe not what we want to hear, because it can tend to complicate our work and make us have to go back to square one and make things more expensive and things like that. So those are other things that I try to keep in mind.
Yeah, love that part about action. And we did an agendaless listening session in January in the community. I'm happy to share some of that with you sometime, but it was really interesting. One of the people there said, we don't have a listening problem, we have an action problem. So, that was, exactly what you're talking about. And also making sure that the person who is a listener in chief has some bias check going on with them and has some self-awareness. I know we're kind of past our 1 o'clock time, but I'll stick around for a few minutes. I want Maggie to be able to talk. And if you can hang out a few more minutes, we'd love to have you do it. Otherwise, thanks for joining us. Maggie, you're up next.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I was just thinking about the comment I think that Bala just made. When you go into these spaces and recognizing that you have an agenda and how do you work with that? And it then reminded me a little bit earlier how David was saying how important it is to keep these concepts in mind for the entire project process. And so if you can have that community listening really from the very beginning, even before you're actually coming up with your research problem or your question, that can help address those problems that come up if you're having an agenda. Sometimes it's because you made the decision in your own space about what you were supposed to be talking about or the problem you're supposed to be solving. So just making sure that you can try to have that community true involvement even from the very beginning can help that, I think.
Yeah, I love letting the community set the agenda or come up with those research questions like you suggested. Maybe you're on the wrong track completely and you need to be doing something else. I think you have to be able to make that pivot if you're truly listening. Any other last words from you? Thanks again for coming and being with us today. Any last words? Well, we'll hope to see you in April. And if anybody has a case study or something they're working on that they'd love to share, we would love to hear from you. And we'll look forward to that meeting in April. And you guys have a great Wednesday. Take care.